Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Today we're going to have just a little bit of a review about where things have been going with Incus versus LXD. So I'm here with Hassan, who is one of my subscribers on the channel, and we frequently have discussions in regards to LXD. And so recently, I had read this article that says that LXD has been relicensed, is now under a CLA. And if you don't really know what that means, it basically means that linuxcontainers.org has always been the folks that maintain both the images that we build LXD containers out of, and they also own the underlying LXC container project. What they do not own is they do not own LXD, which is kind of run by Canonical. So when Stefan Grabler, who was the maintainer for LXD, left Canonical along with a number of other people, a bunch of things started to change. And one of the things is that, as you can see here, Stefan says that Canonical had made the decision to change the LXD license from Apache 2 to AGPL version 3, and as well as that, they require all the new contributors to sign a Canonical CLA. And so that makes the project that used to be completely open source a little bit less than open source. And I think that for LXD users, that might be a little bit scary. And so that's kind of the first thing we wanted to go over here. And from your perspective, Hassan, what do you think about that?
Well, I think this makes it a lot harder for people who want to get into LexD. I don't think that less hands working on a project can be a good thing. And being that I'm just getting into the LexD environment and discovering all these new things, it makes me concerned that things that I might be interested in trying are going to break or be unsupported in the future.
So,
Um,
as a new LexD user, what gives you anxiety about this? I mean, you've now created a server and you have a number of containers on it. And which way do you think you'll go? I mean, because there's obviously a future for both LexD and a future for Incus, which will be the open source fork going forward.
well, that's an interesting question. I haven't really fully decided yet because we haven't seen exactly what Canonical is going to do. But if I had to pick right this second, I would probably go towards Incus as having created a LexD server and, set up a number of containers at this point. I would hate to have be trying to put something together and find out that something a feature I may want to do is not going to be possible because it requires some third party license or something that would prevent me from being able to achieve what it is I'm trying to achieve.
So I think from the point of view of a company might want to continue to use LexD. And I think that when we come down to using LexD, we are going to be seeing a situation where companies are probably going to want to use the Canonical project, whereas I can see open source people wanting to use Incus.
A company might be able be more willing to lean towards that because of maybe enterprise support, I'm guessing, but definitely I think the open source community has a lot more interesting projects. Um, and I think it really comes down to, I guess, maybe a company's budget, perhaps, because open source, there are a lot of open source tools, in my opinion, that are actually better than funded projects.
So, Wayne, who's another subscriber on the channel, has just joined us as well. And one of the things that is really interesting here about looking at this business with the relicensing of LexD is this article that Wayne linked to me. And it is talking about the fact that the image server business with LexD is going to change. So realize that all along, LexD containers, or rather linuxcontainers.org, is where all the images reside where you create LexD containers. And this has been the case, as Stefan says in this article, since 2014. But obviously, there's a lot of cost in maintaining that infrastructure. And I think one of the key things that happened, or what maybe caused him to move from Canonical and leave Canonical along with a bunch of his team members, were the fact that they decided at Canonical that they did not want to build and maintain their own infrastructure, which was fine because that was really at linuxcontainers.org and not at Canonical. However, this has had a really big fallback, and part of that is the fact that if that is going away, or not really going away, but because they're going in a different direction, what's going to end up happening is that those containers, container images, will not be available for your average LexD user, but they will be available for your Incus user because Incus is the new containerization fork, and it'll be at linuxcontainers.org along with all these particular images. Is that how you understand that, Wayne?
Yeah, I mean that's how I think it is as well. I was just about to ask. I just put my hand up there. I was about to ask a question about where do you think that Canonical are going to actually draw their containers from, or are they going to start maintaining their own repository of containers that will only be available to LXD users? Or I just wasn't sure how that bit would play out.
Well, so then there's a sentence down here which says, as a result, Linux Containers Project has made the decision to phase out access to our image server for LexD users. Okay? And so there was sort of a symbiotic relationship here so far with LexD and Incus. And that relationship kind of went this way. If there was a change or bug fix at LexD, they would make that information available to the Incus folks, and Incus would be able to incorporate those bug fixes into the Incus project. Well, recently they decided that they're no longer going to do that, and so consequently, linuxcontainers.org, who has all of the images, said, well, maybe it's time that you guys over at Canonical have your own a container image repository that you guys draw from and that you guys maintain, and that the current repository that LexD uses is the one that Incus uses today, but that LexD needs to begin to phase that out and build their own image repository. That's my understanding from that, Wayne.
Well,
It's a shame that they're kind of splitting the work, you know. So you're going to have these two communities that are doubling up on the work, you know, to main two image repositories. This could have played out a lot nicer in my eyes, but I don't know. I don't know an awful lot about the under the hood stuff, and I always just kind of glance over the top of it. But you kind of have to take people's sort of take on it. And I followed Stefan for quite a while, and especially when he was doing all those videos on the LXD stuff as well. And it's just interesting to see him do a full 180 almost, you know. But he hasn't been particularly treated very well, it seems, with the decisions that Canonical have been making.
Well, I think what's happening is that Canonical has a lot of proprietary projects that they want to have LexD support. And some of the things that they wanted to add into the Canonical version of LexD involved not doing other things. And some of the things that they decided that they did not want to do were some of the key things that Stefan was doing. And that, I think, was probably key in his decision to leave Canonical and come over to linuxcontainers.org.
I did have a question here. Given the timeline that's being displayed, and as a beginner, do you think, given Incus's infancy, do you think it's better for a beginner to adopt into Incus now or stay on LXD, which has a longer history and has been proven to be more stable as it is?
Well, I think if I were a brand new user today, and maybe a month ago I wouldn't have said this, but now because of these recent changes, I think that I would be inclined to recommend that a brand new user start with Incus rather than start with LXD. And so basically, LXD and Incus are both good choices. But I think that going forward, what we're going to see at Canonical is that LXD will probably only support Ubuntu, Debian, and it says here, whatever for whatever reason, it says Gentoo and NixOS. But I don't think this right here has anything to do with Canonical. I think that in reading this announcement, I think that it is just basically that Ubuntu, Debian, Gentoo, and NixOS are the top used images today. And I think that when it comes down to it, going forward, you could probably expect that LXD will only support images that are Ubuntu images, or at least that's my thought. I think they want to move more in a proprietary direction. So if your project had a requirement to run any number of the other images, and Hassan and I just looked offline at the image server list, there's probably about 30 or so distros out there in the linuxcontainers.org. So if you had a requirement for some of those other containers, I think that you would want to run Incus because you would be able to use all of the containers in linuxcontainers.org going forward.
Wow. That's just like I said. It seems a shame that there's going to be less hands for the development work that's been put into all of this.
So I don't know. I don't know exactly what this means. This second bullet here, which is supposed to occur on January 15th, which is actually 2 weeks away. It basically says that LXD 2.0 plus users, and I might point out here, if I come over here to a terminal and I do a LXC -- version, I'm running LXC version 5.19, and 5.20 is not yet out there as a stable image. And you can see that if I do a sudo snap refresh LXD on channel being latest. Oh, and that's another thing, by the way, that going forward, Incus will not be a snap, whereas LXD will be a snap. Okay? So if I do this, it says it refreshed, but it's only version 5.19. So I'm not getting 5.20 yet, which I think 5.20 is probably coming out on maybe January 1st or shortly thereafter. But they always knew that when they got to 5.20, that was going to be where things were going to kind of change.
It seems like, given the timeline by May, it's just a slow crawl to end of life.
Well, and so that end of life comment, when you read this, Wayne, what do you think about Hassan's comment in terms of end of life? How do you think that plays into this announcement? I mean, are you seeing an end of life indicator here?
I mean, that's a tricky one. But if Canonical are kind of just closing the door slightly and keeping their LXD, area, shall we say, like more in line with all their other sort of server or enterprise based products that they have, all of them actually, which I don't use or don't have much of a use case for in what I do basically. But I find it very difficult to say. But I mean, Scott, you know where I stand on the kind of open source and the software freedom side of things. And I mean, there's a few things going on here. Firstly, I'd love to know or take some comfort in the fact that Stefan is getting as much support as he needs from. It's not that it's just not just him, feeding into Incus. And I know there is one other chap as well who's a big player in it. I can't remember his name right
I
now.
think initially I saw a group of 5 developers that left Canonical that were all part of Stefan's group, and I think all
Mhm.
5 of them jumped ship.
Okay, okay. I mean, so from a software freedom point of view, I just love the idea of Incus, and for me personally, I will be moving over. Everything is currently LXD, and I have some Incus instances that I'm just playing around with, but I haven't run that migrate tool. The one tip I would give you, if you are going to migrate over, don't actually experiment with Incus before you migrate. It's better if you've got a fresh install of Incus and go straight to run the migrate tool, because once you do any bit of playing around in Incus at all, or like setting up any pools or whatever it is, setting up some containers or VMs and stuff, it just needs a fresh, clean
Yeah,
install of Incus to be able to begin the migration.
I am planning to do a video about migrating from LexD to Incus, and basically, in a nutshell, what they expect you to do is go to your LexD server and then to install Incus, but not to initialize Incus at all. In other words, not to do the Incus init, basically. And then you run the migration tool with a completely uninitialized Incus, and then it will move everything over.
Okay, yeah, and another side of that as well. I'm kind of pleased it's not kind of hanging on to the Snapland stuff. I mean,
Yes.
I like the fact that it'll probably be that it is available in a repository, and you just add that repository to your sources.list, and you download Incus, and you update the way you would any other piece of software. I mean, not that I have had any problems with the Snap, but I just, again, me personally, I just kind of like the more free aspect of it.
So I've done a few videos in regards to flat packs, snaps, app images, and regular APT package installers. And in general, of course, the reason behind using either a flat pack or a snap is to basically make sure that you have kind of a virtual enclave for the installation of that application, and that application will be in a known environment where it's running. So the main complaint people have about snaps and particularly flat packs are getting all of a sudden a lot more criticism than they've had in the past. So snaps are proprietary to Canonical, and Flatpaks are the open source solution. Clearly, if you install something via a snap, it's a little bit slower than a Flatpak. That being said, there are far more snaps in the world than there are Flatpaks in the world, and most of the snaps are not just desktop software, but they're also all of the server software. So I think that when it comes down to it, especially for a novice user, it's easy to install a snap. But Wayne, I really understand your desire to install it as a regular, say, APT package or something. And I agree with you. For the more experienced user, I would certainly want to have that kind of an access.
As a person who's recently migrated over from Windows to Linux Ubuntu, I can say that I've definitely had a number of issues with Snap programs that have been installed, and APT packages usually resolve the issue when installing them.
Right, right. So I think if we move further down in this list here, where he's talking about the timeline, the key word that everybody is going to be concerned with is this phrase where it says, "will completely lose access." So what that means is it means that you're going to, as a LXD user, you're going to lose access to the linuxcontainers.org images on the linuxcontainers.org image server. It doesn't mean that your LXD will break. It doesn't mean your current containers will break. They'll continue to run just fine. The difference is if you try to pull a new image, an image that you don't currently have a local copy of, or you want to update from the linuxcontainers.org, the LXD project will be unable to do that. So what this doesn't say, because realize that this announcement is from Stefan's point of view, and it is not from Canonical, is that Canonical is probably scrambling right now in their in their releases after 5.20. And like I said, I'm running 5.19 as the current production image. So let's see, anything 5.2 will be under this constraint. The issue will be more than likely that at that point, Canonical will have to have their own image server for their images, and I believe those images might initially only be Ubuntu images, but it will be like linuxcontainers.org. It's just that LXD will have to point to this new image repository. So it's not really a terrible panic on this, but this is a pretty short timeline. And as a matter of fact, by May 1st of 2024, it says all LXD users will lose access. And that basically says that by that point in time, if you're running an older version of LXD, then you would not be able to launch any new containers or download any new images. You'd have to be running a later version of LXD that would then use the newer canonical, yet to be created image repository. Is that the understanding that you see from this?
Yeah, I mean, like as you read it out to me and as you kind of, say the words, it's kind of all sinking in a little bit. But because I just glanced this, I just came across this before I sent it out. But I was going to ask you, Scott, just kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, as for the last number of years, all your videos have been predominantly LXD. Are you kind of going to swing one way or the other, or spread it across both, or will you be making a decision based on which way you might go? And maybe that's not a question for this talk. You can feel free to bat it off if you want, but I'm just curious as well.
Or have you considered doing both?
That's a great question, and I do have one virtual server right now that's running both LXD and Incus on that one server, and in fact, I did a video where I showed that configuration, and so I think that I had always intended to kind of go forward with both LXD and Incus, but I think that most of the commands today, if we draw a line in the sand, most of the commands between LXD and Incus are identical, and most of the behaviors between LXD and Incus are identical. Some of the management commands are a little bit different in Incus. But given the decision here, and because of the fact that I like to promote open source solutions, I'm seeing LXD as doing an about face and moving more towards what I would consider to be a proprietary project with Canonical. So I think that people can continue to benefit from all the videos on the channel that are LXD to do LXD types of things. But I think that going forward, I'm probably much more likely to migrate to Incus and then address Incus as the solution going forward. And it doesn't mean that people wouldn't be able to watch the content and say, oh, yeah, it's pretty much the same between LXD and Incus. And at this point, it is. In the future, I see a lot of things that maybe will be done in Incus that were never done in LXD.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really interesting, actually, and that was a well covered answer there, Scott. Because you're right in the way that people can go to any of the content that you've created already, and it'll, you know, more or less work in Incus, apart from one or two command changes here and there. But all the LXD commands and everything will be the exact same. So everything done to date will be perfectly accessible to any LXD users.
Yeah. So, and then this one, this last comment is a little bit difficult to understand. So it realized that under the covers, so to speak, that LXD itself, and I don't think I've necessarily made this as clear on the channel. LXD is basically a CLI and also an API that sits on top of the basic Linux containers, LXC. And that's kind of why the LXD command line always has the word LXC on it, okay? And so that's confusing for people. It's even confusing when I do a video because sometimes I get tongue twisted between saying LXD and LXC, you know? but basically, this thing here says the 6.0 LTS release of LXC and LXC FS and Incus is scheduled to happen towards the end of March, making it so that LXD LTS users will have an LTS upgrade path by the time image server is revoked for them a couple of months later. So what they're really saying here is they're really saying that the linuxcontainers.org permissions are going to be revoked for LXD users. But prior to that, certainly way prior to that, I see that Canonical is going to release their own equivalent image server, except it'll be hosted at Canonical. And that's, by the way, some of the confusion for users, because if you go online and you get into the community forum, which is exactly where I am here, when you sign on to the community forum, you're at discuss.linuxcontainers.org. And when you go out there, you're really on the linuxcontainers.org open source LXD support place where LXD has always been supported. But now that's not true anymore. LXD is supported over at Canonical, and this place is really where linuxcontainers.org is really where Incus will be supported.
In the early days of the split, or when Stefan first decided to start creating the Incus project, and in my I had a LXD problem that I wanted some help with, and I went over to, so I posted it on linuxcontainers.org as you mentioned there, and Stefan's, or some, I think it was Stefan, sent me over to that this question now needs to be asked over at the Ubuntu forums, and I asked my question over at the Ubuntu forums, and it was tumbleweed is all I got. So the fact that I mean, I know it was early days, and I try to be as forgiving as possible because all this software is free and available to us, and it's absolutely amazing. But to move over to the Canonical side and to ask for help and have zero response, I don't know. It made me wonder what was going on, what way it was going to turn.
So, in my opinion, and I'd be really interested in seeing also what Hassan has to say about this, is that since the 5 or so people left Canonical who were working on the LXD project, I don't know who exactly. There's been one video made by this one lady, and I apologize because I don't remember her name at the moment, talking about their roadmap for LXD and also their MOS, their Metal as a Server project, Metal as a Service project. Anyway, they had a timeline, and she did this presentation about it. And I didn't get a warm feeling that there were many people at Canonical who really understood the nuts and bolts of LXD development going forward. Whereas I know that this entire team that Stefan led has all moved over to Incus. So I get a very warm and fuzzy feeling that going forward that you will be able to get all the support from Incus. And that support structure is really good here in linuxcontainers.org, but it's largely immature over at Canonical. And of course, one of the problems is if you've had a forum around for a while, and this is probably a discourse forum we're looking at. And those of you that watch the channel know that I have discussion.scotti-BYTE.com, and that's where I put all of my show notes. You get a certain maturity after you're around for a few years, and it becomes a pretty go-to database for finding solutions for things you want to commonly do. And we just don't have that over, and you said Ubuntu forum, we'll just say over in the Canonical forum, we don't really have that. And so how do you see that, Hassan?
Interestingly enough, I made a post here on linuxcontainers.org a couple of days ago with an issue that I was having for my LXD server. And yeah, just like Wayne was saying, I was told that, in order to get help with this issue, I needed to head over to Canonical's forums. And even doing so, even at this later date, Wayne was right. It's pretty much tumbleweeds over there. I've since deleted my post since it seems like I'm no longer having any issues, but I can't imagine being in a situation where I need, assistance right away or in a timely manner and I'm unable to get it. Also, I think being that the bulk of solutions found here on the linuxcontainers.org, I'm not sure how Canonical Forums is going to be able to replicate this wealth of knowledge over to their forums at all. I mean, I would also say, I think I'm leaning more towards Incus, like I said earlier, because I feel that people that create open source projects are passionate about it. I think moving towards the enterprise thing, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like in that environment, that warm, fuzzy feeling you're talking about is not there. And they'll create something and say good enough where someone who's passionate will actually want it to work and work well for everyone.
Right, right. And we're starting to see some tools now on the channel here a while back. I realized that I promoted LXD Dashboard quite a bit. And LXD Dashboard's a fairly mature project. And the individual that does that is an open source project. And the gentleman's name is Matthew Penning. And when I had a discussion with him, I was wondering whether or not LXD Dashboard was going to be supporting Incus. And he said that no, going forward, it was not. And he's created a new project, which I did a video about called Lex Console, LX Console. And Lex Console will support both LXD servers and Incus servers. And at this point, it's fairly immature. It works fine, and it has a lot of really nice features where the GUI just seems to be a whole lot more flexible. I basically run both projects, but that's one difference I noticed. So I think one of the things here in this conclusion, this is what I really focused on. It said between Canonical's decision to no longer fund any work on the image build, tooling, or infrastructure, as well as their, and this is where his emotional part comes out, the hostile licensing change. And so I think the argument there is that most people who are going to be contributors to the LXD project are not going to want to sign that CLA with Canonical, that they prefer that it was just a regular open source contribution. I don't know how many people outside of Canonical contributed to LXD, but obviously that's kind of an issue. And then the second part of it, and I think it's a bigger part, and this really isn't emotional, this is more something pretty solid. It's basically saying that that hostile licensing change prevents Incus from benefiting from any of the work on Canonical LXD. So what that means is it means if the Canonical folks do a bug fix or security fix on LXD, that can no longer flow down to the Incus project. So in essence, the fork is now complete. There's no upstream and downstream anymore once this sort of thing happens. And I know that, as he said, we all would have far preferred that Canonical stay committed to providing good quality non-Ubuntu images for their users, as we would have preferred that, and they don't take community hostile actions by relicensing and that sort of thing. But I think basically what they did was they changed their focus. They basically said, we're Canonical, our software product is Ubuntu, and we don't want to put all this effort into maintaining images for all these other distros. And so consequently, we're going to take this in a little bit different direction. What they did not anticipate as a result of that was the fact that they were going to lose access to linuxcontainers.org, where all of their images were, and now they need to create their own image server. Although that shouldn't be a huge job if that image server is only going to have Ubuntu on it, which at this point in time, I don't really know if that's the case or not.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I like your take on it, actually. It's very measured, and I appreciate that, because I'm a sort of an emotional person. I get caught up in the heat of the situation, which I will keep away from this production. But yeah, I think the scrambling around to find images, but like you say, if it is just Ubuntu and maybe Debian or some of their own stuff, I think you're right. I don't think that would be too hard to create. Again, like I said earlier, it's just a pity the split has become, whether accidentally or otherwise, it's become messier than it needed to be,
Right. Hassan, your take on that?
Well, I think Canonical is going to have a difficult time um, being as productive as they once were, because the images sitting on the linuxcontainers.org servers have definitely been developed and patched over time. I don't see how they're going to be able to replicate that. And also, thank you for clarifying what that meant as far as things being able to flow upstream and downstream.
So, for those of you listening that may not be completely familiar with using containers, realize that companies usually take around 10 years to adopt a new technology. And LXD really had its foundings in about 2014 or 2015. And so we're really looking at still a fairly new and young project. The majority of companies out there are using virtual machines still in their infrastructure, which have far more overhead than do containers. And so you have to virtualize all of the hardware also when you're working on virtual machines. So the world is still largely running on things like VMware and Proxmox And mind you, Proxmox does have LXC containers. They don't have support for LXD containers, and so that's a good thing for Proxmox. And by the way, so this is going to make a major impact to Proxmox as well, presumably because, well, I don't know about that because they're only using LexC, so they're using the underlying engine. So the underlying engine is still allowed to use linuxcontainers.org. It's LexD that will have the issue. So it may not have a Proxmox impact. And of course, you have other things in the virtual world like XCP-NG, which is pretty popular. I haven't addressed it. I know there's quite a few other channels that do address it. But I feel like in a way, even though this is a good thing moving towards Incus, I also feel like it somewhat hurts it because you've got people trying to make decisions or people who have recently made decisions, and now they've got LexD servers and they're wondering if they should go over to Incus, and the decision's kind of tough. So from my perspective, I believe we're really going to have solid support from the Incus project going forward since it's so completely ingrained in linuxcontainers.org. I think that's where all the images reside. That's where all the maintenance is going to reside. And I think that Stefan and his team are a great group of people to move this Incus project forward and even make it better than it is today. But I think we're at a point where it's a little scary.
Yeah, it is early days, and I also think it's impressive that they are where they've got to already. You know, Incus 0.4 is a reasonably solid release. I'm not finding any major issues with it. If there's issues, it's probably with little gaps in my knowledge or ways to implement Incus that I am just not used to from running LXD commands. And it's not that they're that different. Actually, they're very similar. I have had to write an alias just to shorten Incus to INC because I was only able to type 3 characters at a time. That's all I was going to allow myself to do, rather than having 5 for every Incus command. I mean, that's just a tiny thing. But yeah, look, I mean, from my point of view, like very much coming from a home lab point of view and a small little bit of LXD infrastructure in my place of work, I will be moving over to Incus. And how soon? Well, seeing that timeline means I'll probably do it sooner than I thought I was going to do it.
Okay.
I completely agree. I think I'm definitely going to be doing the same. And just, speaking of things like VMware, like you mentioned, Scott, with Broadcom's recent acquisition of VMware and them ending perpetual licenses, I'd say Canonical is giving off a similar impression to me. And I definitely feel like I'm going to lean more towards the open source community a lot more.
Well, so realize in the last 10 years, acquisitions of companies have become really commonplace. And so in the open source world, I think when you have a company start to take more ownership in something that was previously open source, and then you have a fork of that particular project, then it's pretty much similar to when you have a company that gets purchased by another company in a corporate transition there. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I think bottom line is that this is going to be just fine. It makes us all a little nervous now. Nobody wants to take a giant server and do a conversion and wonder if it's going to work. All I can say to make people feel a little bit better is that today, as of LXD version 5.19, there is very little difference between LXD 5.19 and the current release version of Incus. There are a few different commands in the management commands, which actually make more sense than the commands that we had over in the LXD CLI. But aside from that, things are pretty similar. If you like a GUI to manage everything, Lex Console's working great. I have an instance of Lex Console that I use all the time, and it's really nice. There's a few different things that need to be ironed out in it. I'm in communication with Matthew Penning, who has now created his group over there called Penning Labs. And Penning Labs is going to specifically be devoted to making Lex Console a superior project for the management of both LXD and Incus containers.
I was just to add as well, maybe a little bit that just the command, the way Incus handles the snapshotting is a little bit nicer as well. It when you delete a snapshot in LXD, it's sometimes I get really nervous that I'm deleting the container. Just if you miss the / or whatever. But I think in Incus now they just reordered the wording slightly to make it a little bit more sense.
Yeah, some of the CLI commands can be pretty confusing. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why most of my videos on the channel are really devoted to understanding all the minutiae associated with the CLI. Because when I started doing the channel, I found out that there was not a lot of information out there on how to use some of these specific CLI commands. They were really lacking in general, and I couldn't Google them. I couldn't find YouTube videos on them anywhere. And I said, we really need to have this clearly defined. And that was kind of my goal. And that's what got me to probably at least over 100 videos that really directly address LXD commands.
I think that's what you've done really well, Scott, actually, and I'm constantly going back, especially, maybe I'm giving too much away here, but I used to go back to all your videos, but now I just go to your discussion forum, and everything is there laid out, for any, question you might have, it's in there somewhere.
Hey, don't feel bad. I actually go out and I search the discussion forum myself sometimes to find the syntax for a command because I don't often remember. And it was funny because I used to have all this information in my Joplin notes, and now I found out that my discussion forum at discussion.scotti-BYTE.com is really my go-to place for my notes and my information. So I find that a bit humorous.
I'm frequently going back to both.
Yeah. Hey, both Wayne and Hassan, I want to thank you for joining us today, and appreciate all of your input. And hopefully going forward here, we'll have some more opportunities to discuss other things.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, great.